Thank you, Tegan, and good morning to you. It's great to be with you. My name is David. Special welcome to each and every one of you in the room and to those who are joining us online. If you have a Bible, why don't you grab it, turn to the passage that we just read. Philippians chapter 2, verse 14 to 30 is where we are going to spend our time today as we continue our series called Joyful. And we've been in this series for a few weeks, and we picked it up last week. And what we're trying to do in this series is learn what does it look like to be a people of joy and live in the way of Jesus together as a family, a church family. And so today we are going to continue on in that endeavor. And before we open up the Word of God, I am just going to pray. Gracious God, we invite you to have your way in this moment. Your heart has always been to be amongst your people. Father, would your desire be realized in this moment? Would you rest your presence among us? Would you speak to us through your word and through your spirit? And we reform our thinking, form our hearts to live as the people that you have saved us to be. Thank you for the glories that await us and the glory that is present in this moment. In Jesus' name, amen. So I'm going to start reading in verse 14 for us this morning. Paul says these words to the church in Philippi and to us. He says, "Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life." I don't know about you, but I just love the imagery in this passage. I mean, Paul is just painting this beautiful picture of the life of faith, the life of the church by these words. He talks about being pure and blameless, children of God, shining like stars in the sky, warped and crooked generation, holding fast to the word of life. He's painting this beautiful picture for the church in the city of Philippi, and he's painting it for us today. But when you read this at first, I mean, it's lofty, it's beautiful, it's great language, but a lot gets lost in translation. Like, what is Paul saying and why is he saying it, right? Well, to understand these verses, the first thing we need to know is that words are being written by a pastor to a people that he loves. Like, there is a special relationship that Paul has with the church in Philippi and they with him. It's a unique relationship. Of all the different churches that Paul was involved in, he has a special place in his heart for this church. He routinely in his letter calls them dear friends. He calls them brothers and he calls them sisters. He's got this familial kind of friendship and family type language. In chapter 4, verse 1, he calls the Philippians my joy and my crown, whom I love. And he opens the letter in chapter 1 by saying, I thank God for you. I pray with joy for you. God has put you in my heart. Paul has a deep affection for these people. He loves them deeply and they have a deep affection for him. And so love is the foundation of this relationship between Paul and this church. He loves them and they love him. But if love is the foundation, then formation is the purpose. See, as their pastor, Paul is at pains to form them with the help of God into the people of God, the people that God intended them to become. He's at pains in this letter to shape their thinking and their actions and their mindset and the way they view the world, the way they relate to one another and to the world outside the walls of the church. And he's been doing this all the way through this letter. He's actually given the church a defining story in the story of Jesus. In chapter 2, verses 5 to 11, Paul gives them this defining story and says, this is the story that's to shape your life. That there is a God, and that this God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and that the second person of this Godhead, God the Son, left heaven, didn't count his glory and majesty as God as something to be held onto and taken advantage of, but he left heaven, came to earth. He took on human form, but more than that, he took on the form of a servant. He humbled himself. He stooped low, and he served us to the point of death on a cross so that we might have a life with God. He gives them this defining story, And then he teaches them what it means to live out that story and walk as a saved people. Didn't Peyton do a good job last week? Okay, I was hoping for a bit more excitement. Where's Peyton? I think he's over there somewhere. You did a good job, mate. I'm proud of you. You did a good job. But Peyton taught us that to follow Jesus is to live as Jesus lived, that he's called us to follow in his footsteps. And Paul is just going to continue on in this theme, in this formation work in our passage today by teaching us what it means to live as a people of light. And he starts with this: to be a people of light means that you lay aside some things in order to take up the things of Jesus. That there's a practice where you need to lay aside things like pride and competition or selfish ambition and vain conceit. That you need to work to put aside consistent, ongoing, habitual grumbling and complaining for a life of humility, for a life where you live for others, where you love them with the way you treat them and serve them, a life of servanthood, where you put others before yourselves. This is where Paul has been calling the church, what he has been teaching discipleship is and what it looks like. Convicting, 100%. Challenging, absolutely. Possible, 100% it is. 100% it is. In fact, in verses 19 to 30, Paul is going to put two living examples of two young leaders that he is kind of running with or in the trenches, and he's going to put them forward and saying, look at these guys. Look at how they live. They are examples who are alive and living out the way of Jesus. Now, I'm not going to read the verses because it'll take us too long, but this is not just a ministry report. Like, Paul is not just reporting to the church, hey, here's what Timothy and Epaphroditus are doing. I mean, that's part of what he's doing, but more so, he's giving us their examples of how to live with Jesus' humility and sacrifice in their lives. First, he talks about Timothy in verses 19 to 23. Timothy was like a son to Paul. Paul looks at Timothy as a father would look at his son. And he says that Timothy is someone who has served faithfully with him in the trenches of ministry. That he has actually taken on the posture of a servant in the same way Jesus took on the form of a servant in his life. That Timothy is a model of the servanthood of Jesus. And then he turns to Epaphroditus. And he says, Epaphroditus was sent by the church in Philippi to take care of Paul while he is in prison. Remember, Paul is in a prison as he writes these words. And so the church, because they love Paul, they have sent Epaphroditus to go take care of Paul. And while he's there, he gets so sick, he almost dies. That Epaphroditus is someone who risks his life for the good of others. That he has followed in the footsteps of Jesus, but where Epaphroditus almost died and is still alive, Jesus actually gave his life in loving service to us. And so these two young leaders are examples of the humility and sacrificial life of Jesus, showing us, church, that it is possible for you and I to live in the same way. That what Paul is teaching is not without its challenges, yes, but it is possible. It is within your grasp. Is it easy? Not at all. Challenging for sure. Possible for you and me 100%. I don't know if you do this when you read the Bible or not, but sometimes I read the Bible and I look at the people in the Bible and I'm like, I'm skeptical that this could actually be true of my own life. Like, I look at them and I sometimes read the Bible with these glasses on where the people in here are superhuman, or they've tapped into something that I just don't have access to, or that they're somehow different than me, when in reality, they're the exact same as you and me. Like, Timothy, you know, he has health issues. And in another letter that Paul writes, he seems to suggest that Timothy's a little bit timid at times. And Epaphroditus, well, he gets sick, just like you and me, and he almost dies. I mean, these are really human things that humans experience, meaning that they're just like us, that it is possible, and that the only difference might be their willingness to actually put the way of Jesus into practice. That may be the only difference. Timothy and Epaphroditus are two people who love Jesus, had their life changed by him, and then said, I am going to commit my life to live out his way in humility and sacrifice and in service of others. That may be the only difference between us and between them, that they committed themselves to walk in the way of Jesus. Now, a basic principle of spiritual formation is to take hold of what God has for you in Jesus. Means you're going to have to let go of some things that you're holding on to here. Some things that maybe don't line up with what God says is right, good, true, and best. Ephesians 5, Colossians 3, they have this put off and put on kind of writing and a model of discipleship. It's like a coat that if to follow Jesus, to become pure and blameless, to be like him, to become a person of light, you need to actually take off some things and then put on the kind of things that Jesus says to put on. That's discipleship. It's allowing God to work within you and help you to put off what isn't of him so that you can put on what is. And Paul is illustrating this in this passage. He starts by saying, lay aside this so that you can go and live like this. He says, do everything without grumbling or arguing so that you may become. Church folk, boy, do we need to hear that. We need to hear the words of Paul because we major in grumbling and complaining. We will grumble and complain about everything, and we probably already have. See, we grumble about the lights being too bright or too low, the sound being too loud or too quiet. We grumble about the songs on our way home. The songs really didn't do it for me today. We grumble about the clothes the pastor wears. I actually got an email once that complained about me putting my hands in my pockets too much when I speak. And I've forever been self-conscious, and so every time I put my hands in my pockets now, I'm like, I got to get them out because it's a little bit uncomfortable. Because they might be out there and I might be caught out again. So we'll complain about that. We will complain when new people sit in our seats. The nerve. How dare they? That's my seat. We will complain and grumble when broken and hurting people show up. And guess what? They act broken and hurting. We'll argue about theology. We'll argue about how to do ministry, about decisions that are made or not made. We'll argue about everything like masks or no masks in COVID. I mean, we argue and we grumble about so much. And what does Paul say to this? Say it with me. Do everything without grumbling or complaining. Because to be a people of light, we must lay this aside so we can live in the better way of Jesus. Now, we'll get to the better way in a moment, but before we do, let's pause and ask why. Why is Paul specifically talking about grumbling and arguing in this moment? Well, there's practical implications in this text, in this letter, is that the church, as we've talked about, they have conflict happening. There's conflict between two leaders in the church, and it's seeping out into the rest of the church. And so Paul comes along and says, put this aside. Put it to an end so you can get back to living out the purpose that God has for you in the city. He's like, put it aside. So there's this immediate situation, and to help them, Paul is going to put a story before them. And a good way to think about what he's doing in verse 15 and throughout this passage really is to think about game film. See, when I played hockey, one of the things that our coaches would do all the time is that they would film every game. And then they would edit the film of the game, and then they would have team meetings where we would go through the film. And the two purposes of that were essentially to learn from your mistakes. So they would show us how we made mistakes, which was not fun. And they'd be like, don't repeat them, but they would say it much more nicely. No. And then they'd show us stuff and say, this is how you do it. Here's how you learn to play the right way. This is how we want you to play. And it was this tool to learn how to grow and improve and how to play the right way as a team so that when you went on the ice and the game clock started, you knew how you had to play. It was clear. And so for Paul, here's what he's doing. He's taking an ancient story from the life of Israel, and he's created a game film in this passage, and he's putting it before them to teach them something. And that story is from the wilderness wanderings of Israel. This comes from the time after God has rescued Israel out of slavery in Egypt. He has moved in a mighty way. He has moved in power. He has broken the chains of slavery and brought them into a life with him. And they're in freedom. And the Bible tells us that almost immediately, guess what Israel begins to do? Complain. Exodus 15, 16, and 17 tell us stories 3 different times of Israel complaining that they don't have any food and water as they wander in the desert. Now, to be fair, if you don't have food and water in the desert, that's a big deal. It's a big deal. But the complaining is driven by this sense of it was actually better for us if we were in slavery back in Egypt because at least we had food there. So it was a disregarding of the rescue of God. And amazingly, each time God hears these complaints, you know what he does? Is he feeds them and gives them water. Miraculously, he brings water out of a rock and he rains down bread called manna from heaven. Even though they grumble, our God is gracious. And he provides for them. Fast forward to another story in Numbers 11. Israel has been eating this bread from heaven that every day it just shows up on the ground because God is miraculously caring for his people. And guess what they say to God? We're tired of eating this bread. I'm sick of it. Boy, remember the food we had back in Egypt? We had cucumbers and melons and onions and meat. Oh, that was so good. But this miraculous bread from heaven, I don't want it anymore, God. This continues and continues, and finally Israel gets to the threshold of the land that God has been leading them to. His purpose for rescuing them was to bring them into a land and a place of rest. And on the threshold, we read these words in Numbers chapter 14. It says, all the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron. Those are the two leaders of Israel. And the whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. After years and years and years of this happening, God has had enough, and he says, how long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me in spite of all the signs I have performed among them? Did you catch what God said there? He says, how long will they refuse to believe in me? See, the arguing and complaining of Israel that had happened over all this time revealed hearts that didn't actually trust in God or believe that he would come through for them. And the end result is that this generation did not get to enter the promised land. They ended up dying in the desert, and the next generation got to enter into the promise and experience the rest. And I want to be clear is that the complaining and the arguing in the desert was habitual, it was ongoing, and it showed a lack of belief in God. There is space to lament in the life of faith. I mean, Israel's songbook called the Psalms, most of the Psalms are lament psalms where people are pouring out their hearts to God in pain, crying out, how long are you going to make me suffer, Lord? How long am I going to have to deal with this? It's this opportunity the lament gives us to cry out to God in our hurt and our pain. But the key with lament is it always turns the corner to trust at the end. That complaint becomes trust, saying things like, even so, if nothing changes, I will trust in you, God. Yet, even if nothing changes and I still have to wait and I still have to struggle, I will trust in you and I will follow you, God. And so Israel never turned the corner to trust in the wilderness. They just complained. They just grumbled, and that's why they never entered into the rest. And Paul takes this game film, shows it to the Philippian church, and says, don't make the same mistakes as them. Learn from your spiritual ancestors. Choose a different path than they did. Lay grumbling and arguing aside so that you can live as people of light, which is where he goes in verse 15. He says, do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that, that's a reason. Here's the reason why. Here's the reason that you need to lay this aside, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life. So what Paul is doing here is he's again rooting this teaching in an ancient story from Israel, and he's inviting the church to live out its identity and vocation as the people of God. This is what he's doing. He's reminding the church of who they are and what they've been placed in the city of Philippi for. That there's a reason they're there. And significantly, this reason is tied to the ancient people of Israel when God first formed them as a people. See, in Exodus chapter 19, God brings the people to Mount Sinai. And there, he speaks words over them, and you can see them on the screen. He tells Israel, this is who you are. This is your identity as a people. You are a rescued people. saved from slavery into a relationship with me, Yahweh God, the creator of heaven and earth. You are my treasured people, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. That is your identity. This is who you are. This is who you are to become. This is how you are supposed to live your life. This is the place that you live your life from. That's identity. And then a prophet comes along. His name's Isaiah. And he speaks these words in Isaiah 42 and 49. He says, this is God talking through Isaiah, I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will take hold of your hand. I will keep you and will make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles, to open eyes that are blind, to free captives from prison, and to release from the dungeon those who sit in darkness. And then, in verse 49, he says, I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. And so God's people have a purpose to represent God to the nations, to be a light to the world, to bring salvation to the ends of the earth and make it available for all people. God says, be a light. We've been called, created, formed by God, and sent to be a people of light who join God in seeing eyes open to what they cannot see, to see captives set free from spiritual prisons, to see light break in on those who are sitting in darkness, and to call them out and plunder the dungeons of darkness. Does that not sound like our vision from Isaiah 61? It's the same language. It's the same language that Jesus used in Luke 4 when he said, this is why I came. And so from the very start, the people of God have had an identity and a purpose to be a light in the world, to be a people of light who reveal who God is and bring salvation to the world. And here's the thing, this purpose has not changed. It's still in place, but it has culminated in the arrival and activity of Jesus and the new people, the new humanity and community he formed in the aftermath of his life, death, and resurrection called the church. That's why we read in 1 Peter chapter 2 the very same words from Exodus 19, but now it is centered around Jesus, that on the other side of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, God has created a people. He has created a people to do this. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession. To do what? To declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Same language, same identity, same vocation, but now it's centered around Jesus and declaring his praise, which is actually translated to make him known. And so the church, the body of people who have put their faith and their trust in Jesus, have this identity and purpose. If you are here today and you follow Jesus, this is your identity and your purpose as a part of the church of Jesus. God has set his heart on his church and given it an identity as a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. We are his special possession. He loves you. He loves his church. And we have been rescued to make known the one who has called us out of darkness into light, so that other people would have the same experience that you and I have had, and they would come out of the darkness and into the light. This ancient identity and vocation is still alive, and Paul is saying to the Philippians and to us, don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Fulfill the purpose of God in your city. Be blameless and pure and a light in the darkness. Our youngest son, Jack, is turning 6 in March. And he is so strong and courageous, but he's still afraid of the dark. It makes him feel unsafe. And so we have his little room, and we've made it all nice for him, but he never sleeps in it because he's afraid of the dark. It makes him feel unsafe. It's not a safe place for him. And so when it's at bedtime, it's so dark for him, he doesn't want to be there. And so for Christmas, he got this light. It's like this little kind of rubbery cat sleeping, but it can change in different colors. And so we put the light in the room, and we kind of showed Jack, we said, hey, look, watch this. And we had the lights off, and it was dark, and then you turn on the light, and the darkness disappears. It was just one little light, but the light made a difference for him, or at least we hope it will. I don't know if it has yet. I don't know if it has yet. But the point is that one light can dispel darkness. And God has put his light in the world, and guess what? You and I, we're that light. We're that light. Jesus said so himself in Matthew. He's teaching the famous sermon called in the Sermon on the Mount. And he says these amazing words about who you and I are as the people of God. He says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So Jesus says, this is who you are. My people, you are the light of the world, and your task is to let that light shine, to bear testimony through your life of the presence and the promise of God and his salvation. And he says, when you've been given this light, the light of heaven, the light of salvation, don't cover it up. Don't treat what God has given you like a lamp that you cover and no light shines. Jesus is like, let the light shine, because when you do that, God gets the glory, he is revealed, and the darkness starts to disappear. And so as the church, we are not simply here to hold on and survive these dark days. We are here to be a lighthouse in the city. We are here to look at the darkness and say, not on our watch. We are going to go and be a light anywhere injustice reigns. We are going to go anywhere where darkness has a hold and bring the light of heaven there, the light that we have been given. We will go to the people on the edge where they are sitting in darkness, and we will bring the light and lift them up and walk with them into the light. That's what the church is for. And by doing that, as we take on this identity and we live out this vocation, the presence and reality of God invades the darkness and it begins to cast it out. And so we are called to be a people of light. And so my question, as I'm sitting here in my office and I've been thinking about this all week, is why does our light so often feel dim? Why does our light so often feel dim? Well, the fact is that there are things in our lives that tend to dim our light. Right? Traumatic experiences, the loss of someone close to you, the breakdown of a marriage, something someone did to you or said that has forever marked you, and you just can't get that out of your mind. Maybe there's a mistake we made, going through suffering or pain that we experience. Sometimes, and this is really tragic, sometimes there are people in the world who see people who are letting their light shine, who are living in the fullness of what God has made them for, and they want to snuff that out. That sometimes happens. I know I've had that happen to me. And so there are things in our lives that can bury the light within us. But I think there's also sometimes we dim our light out of fear. See, we desire to to fit in. We desire to be liked. And it's hard in these days to try and stand out, right? Like at your workplaces or with your friendship groups or your family members or at class. Like it's hard sometimes to stand out and to live for Jesus in those places, because the moment you start to stand out for something in anything, you're going to be criticized, you're going to be vulnerable, and that's hard. And so sometimes out of fear, we prefer to stay in the shadows when we've been called into the light. I remember reading this book years ago. It's called The Power of One. It's about a boy living in apartheid in South Africa. And he's brilliant, he's smart, he's athletic, he just stands out. He's head and shoulders above all the other kids his age. But the problem is his peers notice, and they don't like it. And so they want to dim his light because they're jealous of him, because he always wins the races when they have track and field, and he always gets the best grades, and the teacher calls on him, and so they seek to knock him down a peg. They seek to dim his light. And after months of this bullying and being beat up and ostracized, this boy decides that the only answer is to stop standing out. And he says this line that has stuck with me all these years, and the line is this: mediocrity is the best camouflage known to man. Meaning that if you don't want to stand out or be noticed or be criticized or to take a risk, then just become mediocre and stay in the shadows. dim your light. See, this happens. I've done this, and so I'm guessing that there's people in this room that experience this too. But the problem is we were not made to dim our light. We were not made to cover what God has died to give us. He rescued us out of darkness and into light. He's put his Spirit in us, and he's put something in your hands that only you can give to the world. He gave that to you so that you could let it shine, that you could unleash it and join him in letting the darkness be defeated. This is who you are. This is who we are called to be as the church. And both Paul and I are joining together as pastors who love you and saying, be a light in the city, church. Live as the light of the world. Let your light shine. Don't cover it up, even if it's hard. Don't stay in the shadows. You were made for this. God saved you for this. He is with you in this. And together, as we individually and together commit to this, we can live as a people of light. But it means facing our fears. Can I just be really honest with you? It is scary to stand in this light because I'm vulnerable. I'm exposed. I'd much prefer to be over here. But God has called me there. And I am trying, with the help of God and people that love me, to stay here and go, I will not dim my light anymore. I will not take what God has given me and stay in the shadows and not use it. Thank you. So it's scary. I'm not saying and not asking you to do something that I'm not already trying to do. But here's the thing, when we face our fear, something happens. And I love this quote from Marianne Williamson. She says this, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. That is why you have to live as a child of light. You were made to manifest the glory of God that is within you. And by doing that, you give permission to that person sitting beside you to do the same. You step forward together in fear, and you say, I am scared out of my wits, but I'm going to do this because I'm not going to let fear win, and I'm definitely not going to let darkness win. And when each of us takes that risk, when each of us lets our light shine, we give permission to others, and then slowly, like fires popping up at a campground and burn brighter, we become a people of light. And so my exhortation to you today is live as a child of light. Don't accept the darkness. You might say, and you might be wrestling back and forth with me in your head going, how can I make a difference? What can I do? Well, I want to tell you something that a wise person once told me. His name's Gandalf. In the Hobbit movie, he says, some believe it is only great power that can hold evil in check. But that is not what I have found. It is the small, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keeps the darkness at bay. Small acts of kindness and love. See, it doesn't have to be so complicated. It takes one act and one step of kindness and love at a time. It's in a commitment that I'm going to pour my life out in service of something bigger. That's what Paul is saying at the end of this in verse 18. He's like, I have poured my life out for this. I am pouring my life out for God. The Philippians, they're sacrificing themselves to be a people of light. And Paul says, continue to do that. Be a light in the dark world. And so as we close, I just want to give you a couple ways that you can get started. And they're right from the text. The first is choose gratitude over grumbling. See, I'll be really honest, complaining and grumbling is easy. That's the easy way out. Choosing to be grateful And putting in the work to sit down at the end of your day and write down 3 things that you're thankful for and then thank God for them, that takes work. So what you need to do this week is at the end of your day, sit down in a pen and paper or on your computer or iPhone note and just say, here's 3 things I'm thankful for, God. God, I thank you that when I came home, my children ran to hug me. Thank you that I can actually hold my kids in my hands today. Thank you for my wife who has made a brilliant dinner after having a long day of taking care of 2 rambunctious boys. Thank you for our house. Thank you for the food. It's put the work in, choose gratitude over grumbling, and guess what happens is our hearts start to change. Our hearts change, we change. That's the first thing. The second is hold firmly to the word of life. That word hold firmly means to stick to. Hold fast to, glue yourself to. And the word of life is the truth of God as revealed in the Bible and King Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life. So Paul is saying, stay close to Jesus. Walk with him. Follow him. Be glued to him. Be glued to the truth of God. Take time to read the Bible and pray. Stay close to God by encountering him in his word. That's how we get formed to think and live like Jesus. It's how the life of God gets unleashed in us, and it's how the light of God begins to come out in greater ways. So here's a challenge. Go this week and read Philippians chapter 2, 5 through 11 every day. And then after you read it, say, God, what do you want to highlight for me from this passage? And just wait. Wait for God to maybe draw your attention. Maybe you have to read it a few times, but engage with it. And then whatever God highlights, write it down, and then ask him to help you put it into practice this week. Do this, and over time, you will grow and you will become more like Jesus. God will begin to work in you and change you, and the light that you've been given will begin to emerge in greater ways. And so what if we did this together, church? What if we actually committed to this individually and as a community to be a people of light in this city? I think our city would change. I think lives would change, because when we do that, that's our identity. That's our purpose, to be a people of light. And I pray, God, I pray that we would be a people of light. I pray that we would take on the identity and the purpose that you have given us. I pray that we would not squander or mishandle the reality that Jesus died and rose again so that we could become the light of the world. Give us eyes to see where the darkness lies, and give us the courage to step out of the shadows and into the light, and to let our light shine there. And in the end, would you be glorified? Would you be revealed? And would the darkness be overcome in this city in greater and greater ways? That's our prayer. In Jesus' name.